It's time for Supply Chain Now Radio, sponsored by Apex Atlanta and Talent Stream. Broadcasting live from the supply chain capital of the country, Atlanta, Georgia, Supply Chain Now Radio spotlights the best in all things supply chain. The people, the companies, the technologies, the best practices, and the critical issues of the day. Now, here are your hosts.
All right, good morning. Scott Luton here with you live on Supply Chain Now Radio. Welcome to the show. We're glad you've chosen to join us today, though. We're not in Atlanta. We're broadcasting live from beautiful Orlando, Florida, where we are at Velocity 2019. You might can hear the buzz in the room behind us. It's the forum to learn about solutions and strategies that will help you accelerate your digital supply chain. You can learn more at velocity-conference.com. We're going to be chatting with a variety of supply chain leaders today, and this is our first segment of the day, our leadoff hitter. So let's welcome our featured guest, Kyle Garcia, Demand Planning Manager with Danner Boots. Good morning, Kyle.
Good morning, Scott.
Glad you are here from the Portland area, right?
That's right, Pacific Northwest.
Pacific Northwest. So tell us, easy trip in?
Yeah, it was brutal. Actually, I had the red eye at 11 o'clock, didn't sleep on the plane, got here at 10 o'clock, the whole rigmarole. We know the deal. We're in supply chain. We're moving all night long.
That's right. That is right. Well, glad to have you. Glad you're here. We'll talk more about the Velocity Conference in a second. But before we talk about Danner Boots, tell us more about your background, your overall journey.
Yeah, so it started off in Albuquerque, New Mexico. First job out of school was at America Online, AOL. I still hold the AOL email. I know I'm a relic, but I'm not, you're going to have to pull that from my cold, dead hands.
Right. Man, AOL,
yeah. I got to. It's so stereotypical. Got sent to Asia to be sales manager and train folks in Asia how to do the job, and thus replace the more expensive labor here in America.
What part of Asia?
The Philippines. So yeah, it was beautiful. I loved it, and I spent a lot of time there. Had the option to live there, but my wife didn't like the cold. Yeah, she did. She did.
So when did you come back from the Philippines?
I came back in 2006. So was in sales, had another job at Konica Minolta, sales management. Got an opportunity to join a company in Portland called Gerber. So Gerber Knives and Tools. It's a subsidiary of Fiskars Brands out of Wisconsin. And, I joined up with that group. And before long, they said, hey, do you want to be our sales and operations planning manager? And I'm like, it has sales in the title. Yeah, I got this. Little did I know what I was biting off at the time, but that was 12 years ago.
Wow. S&OP seems like it has gotten – it's always been important, but it seems like it is a white-hot area right now in supply chain. In our pre-show warm-up here, Kyle, we were telling you about what we did in Atlanta with Apex Atlanta. We hosted an executive roundtable session at Graphic Packaging International Headquarters. That was facilitated by Corinne Bursa with Agility, who's here today, and I think she's going to be speaking. And she did a fantastic job leading a very interactive session with a variety of different companies from different sectors that all talked about S&OP best practices. So seems like you could lead a similar session maybe.
Well, I think I could tell people what not to do more than anything. Anytime I have the opportunity to talk about experiences, I feel like I tell people or share what's working really well, and then I say, but these are some of the challenges we've ran into.
Don't do that.
Yeah, don't do this. And that always is like that's what people take away from all those conversations.
Interesting. So now how long have you been in your role as demand planning manager with Danner Boots?
I've been here for 10 months. Before that, I was at Adidas, so another footwear company. And then, before that, as mentioned, as S&OP manager at Fiskars. So, yeah. What
a great addition to the team, especially with your experience with Adidas, for Danner Boots to have added you. What a great get.
I hope that, I would agree. I hope so.
They signed a leading free agent.
They did, yeah.
Well, okay, so we also learned in our warm-up that you are a volunteer leader with the Apex Portland chapter. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so basically we were quite a strong member group up there in the Pacific Northwest out of Portland. We have about 450-ish members that are part of our Apex group local chapter. My role on the board of directors is I'm really fortunate. I have a really engaged and a youthful group of leaders there. And sometimes in supply chain, it's hard to find the next up-and-coming group. So I've been really fortunate to be on a group of young professionals. We have some good senior leadership on the board of directors, but my role specifically is the director of PDMs, professional development meetings. And so, yeah.
So, and how have you, you were telling me earlier that a lot of your PDMs, you used a pub that you've been at for 35 years. That's remarkable.
Yeah. Our chapter's been around for quite a while. But yeah, Kells in downtown Portland. If you've ever been to Portland, you've probably walked by Kells. Any third Thursday, if you're in the area, please join us.
Kells. How do you spell that?
Kells. It's an Irish pub. We have the upstairs ballroom there.
Okay. Kells Irish Pub, and you can check that out at kellsportland.com, as a matter of fact. How about that? Thanks, Malcolm and the research team. All right, so let me go back to a point you mentioned, because I think a lot of, whether you're APIX or ASCM, of course, which is we're all ASCM members now, or if you're ISM, or if you're CSCMP, or if you're any of the professional associations, and we do a lot of benchmarking in Atlanta. Y'all probably do something similar in Portland. I think we're all struggling to really engage and get that next wave of professionals into associations and volunteer leadership positions, and probably because we're struggling to answer that with them, questioning what's in it for me and for them. So how have y'all been able to build that bridge then? Because clearly something you are doing is working.
Yeah, it's a multi-faceted dragon there, multi-headed dragon. Couple things. One, our director of student engagement works very closely with the local professors. In fact, the professors come to most of our events, and the head of the supply chain from Portland State University. We work really closely with U of P as well, University of Portland, but we engage them. We go and speak at all of their events. They have a supply chain career fair. We go and volunteer. I was just there 2 weeks ago with another board member. We also have the opportunity to go and speak to students. So we always send representatives there. So I've had the privilege of doing that. We just try to engage them as much as possible. And the message right now is really simple. This is and I know you mentioned this before, but so true. There's never been a better time to get into supply chain.
Amen.
So yeah, we just engage them. That's the first part. The second part is that we try to bring insightful speakers and talk about topics that are relevant to young people today. So, there are broad subjects like S&OP that we discuss.
Sure.
But we also try to talk about what is machine learning. We try to share we have another feature called Have a Job, Need a Job. So if you're a student and you're in school, the first thing that's rolling through your mind is how do I take these skills and translate them into money? So we do this feature. It's a 5-minute call out. Diane Garcia, she's not related to me, but another board member stole this from another chapter. I mean, that's the best ideas we have.
We're going to steal it too.
Please do. We just keep stealing from each other. It's a 5-minute segment. Have a job, stand up, talk about it to the audience. Need a job, stand up, talk about it to the audience. So I know personally multiple people that have gotten jobs that way through this or at least had interviews and at least in one case definitely got a job. So
love it.
Yeah, it's good.
What a great we're gonna have to proliferate out those best practices, because I know a lot of chapters are struggling with the that engagement bridge. So Charlie Tang is your president, right? Apix Portland.
That's right.
I want to say he spoke at the Apix Top 50 Symposium.
Yep.
And he was a compelling speaker, by the way. And he also laid out some of the things that you're talking about. So please give him our regards when you go back.
I definitely will not. No, his ego's already too big.
Oh, no.
No,
well, tell him I want an autograph.
I'm joking. I love Charlie. He's great.
Well, it seems like y'all have a lot of neat things going on in Portland, and a very board that is a lot of kindred spirits, it seems like, on the leadership team.
No,
right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So let's talk more about what pays the bills. So Danner Boots. Tell us more about Danner Boots and what you do there.
So I manage our demand planning team. Danner Boots, we've been making boots since the 30s, and we are actually owned by LFI, which is lacrosse footwear. So if you're hunting, you're hiking, you're in the outdoors, you either have a Danner or lacrosse boot on. But my role is in demand planning. So our biggest sector is a wholesale market, but as most companies, we're transitioning to direct. to consumer sales.
Okay.
So even though wholesale is the biggest part of our business, a growing part of our business is direct to consumer.
Can you? It might be under wraps, but anything you can share? How do y'all plan on doing that? Is it all through your website, or are you going to be using partners, or can you not talk about it?
No, some of it's pretty out there in the world. We have our own direct retail locations in a few locations.
Okay.
We have I think 6 locations currently.
Okay.
So the idea is to grow that, and basically but yeah, I mean the transition is tough. So it's
Absolutely.
funny. It's like you've heard the old adage that a potter always has the worst shoes. Every company that I talk to, they say this, the hardest thing is for us to plan our own business,
right,
and our own growth.
Absolutely.
We expect our wholesalers to give us a forecast, but internally, that's always a challenge.
Absolutely. Well, the Portland area, what Apex needs, we need to take the ASCM 2019, which I know is coming up in Vegas. We need to take that up to Portland and the Pacific Northwest. I haven't had a chance to get up there yet, but it's got to be a very from what I've heard, the feedback I've gotten, a really neat business community and a great place to live and work.
I would totally agree. Definitely forward thinking. We kind of sit in the shadows of Seattle and San Francisco, but a lot of companies there are, there's a lot of footwear, there's a lot of outdoor. So all of the companies, when I talk to my colleagues, whether it be Columbia, Nike, my experience at Adidas, Keen is down the road. We have a fun environment, and it like we all challenge each other to make each other better. We're all friends. I have friends at each one of those companies, and we're definitely competitive. But on the other side, it helps us to come together as a community. So
co-opetition.
Yeah,
co-opetition.
I'm stealing that. That's good. I love it.
So Danner Boots been making footwear since the 1930s. Part of the LFI team. Seems like y'all have a lot of growth going on.
Yep.
Moving into the direct side, direct retail.
Yep.
Let's go a little bit broader now. Let's talk about what are 2 or 3 or 1, whatever you pick. What are some of the current supply chain trends that you're tracking the most right now?
Well, there's a lot of buzzwords. Everybody's talking about machine learning, and everyone's talking about AI. You'll hear people talk a lot about blockchain, and the next question is, what does that translate to? So I think we talked about this. We're in the middle of a supply chain revolution, and you're hearing that whether it's through ASCM or here at the Velocity Conference. So true. The one thing that really stands out to me is if you're a professional in the field right now, we're going through a change to enable that's forcing us to look not at our tools but our processes. And I think over the last 30 years we've been able to refine our tools and keep our processes.
Right.
That's going to change.
Yep.
The next 5 years, we have to be ready to be mobile and agile as professionals to learn the newest things. Because we're going to have kids coming out of school that actually are probably better equipped to run our supply chain than we will in 3 or 4 years, because we're thinking old school, we're thinking the way that it used to be, and we need to embrace this change as professionals. So for those of us that have been experienced, that have a little bit of experience under our belt, we got to be ready to change. For those younger students coming out, they need to be confident and be willing to be humble and learn from the old gray heads like us that have been in the business for a while, but also to speak up and talk about what's new and help them. These supply chain leaders help them hold their hand and pull them across the line, so to speak.
So, Kyle, let me ask you a different question. I was at an event last week, and a couple of us were talking, and a couple of traditional supply chain practitioners, we'll call it. And we're all kind of making an observation, in today's landscape, technology, whether it's supply chain industry or whether it's something else, that gets all the attention. And that's the sexy thing. That's the big shiny object. And in many ways it should be, right? Because it's revolutionizing supply chain. However, what can be lost in the shuffle if you don't have that right balance is when you lose sight of the blocking and tackling, which are the core, timeless things that have to happen in the supply chain function. Talk to that a little bit. How do you strike that right balance in terms of embracing new technological advancements and how that can really improve your optimization of your supply chain's performance with, hey, we still have to dot the I's and cross the T's, folks,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's where we put professional at the end of our name, right? That's our job, is to do that. So first is be aware that this change is happening. Second is to embrace it and think, okay, how can I internally bring this into my world without destroying and disrupting?
Right. Practical application is a phrase I keep coming back to. Practical application. You know, we all want the newest, the greatest, the coolest things. However, sometimes it's not a fit. And I was reading a really neat article in the CSCMP Quarterly magazine, and these folks should sponsor a show. I think I've talked about this the last 10 podcasts. But it lists some of the technologies that have been around forever, but their practical application all of a sudden became much more relevant. For example, blockchain.
Right.
Blockchain technology has been around since 1991. However, the current application became a lot more relevant, and now we're seeing how you can't have a supply chain conversation these days without mentioning blockchain, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
so I think it really comes down to tools. So we're so lucky now that I think people have had this. We've been talking about it now for maybe a decade, but for the last couple of years. But now organizations are building the tools that are enabling us to do that. So the technology hasn't been there, even though people know this is the way to go and they know this is what we want to do. Without the technology, it hasn't been possible. But now that companies that are building this into our tools, our ERP systems and our CRM systems and our MRP systems, the technology is just low-hanging fruit. You can buy it, and you don't have to go and hire a data scientist to do this. They're making these solutions really simple for us to bring into the organization and to roll out.
Yep, practically.
Yeah.
So this is your first time at the Velocity Conference, right?
That's right.
So we're about we're still in the early part of day 2 here. What's been your key takeaways thus far? Your most your favorite component of the conference?
So yeah, we're just at the beginning of day 2. I think the one thing that really shocked me is that I found at least 8 companies in the Pacific Northwest that are using Logility. So we're going to make a little mini group, and I think in June we're targeting to get together and talk about how we use Logility, how we use the demand solutions and Halo, and how we can springboard this and have a conversation on how we can make improvements. So. We're building a mini tactical group in the Pacific Northwest so that we can put our brains together and synergize.
I love that.
But I'm looking forward to just learning more about the tools and capabilities. So it's great because they have the solutions over here, Cafe, where you can go and pick their brain. And our company hasn't bought all of the different solutions. We have the DP module of Agility and the IP, but just being able to go try it out and see what works and how it fits.
Talk shop, being able just to whiteboard and share some of the challenge. Everyone's got challenges in supply chain. Amazon, I saw the report, not to pick on Amazon, but Amazon is clearly seen as a incredible super supply chain competitor, right? Best in class. I mean, Amazon gets a ton of love and praise. We saw a news report last night where they were struggling with their food delivery and inaccurate orders. So, and again, I want to give Amazon a big hug because they're very successful.
Right.
But that goes to show we all have challenges. If supply chain was easy, humans would not be involved. It'd already be bots picking out making all the decisions. It's challenging.
Yeah, absolutely.
So being able to move into a room with the Solutions Cafe, as you mentioned, and be able to talk supply chain, talk challenges, talk shop, it seems that's been a valuable component thus far of your experience here, right?
It is, because it's not just about what you're doing and how to do it better. It's what you're not doing and how you can do that. So the challenge I think every supply chain professional runs into is capital and getting your organization to invest in a cost center that is, tying that back to value is always the challenge. So when you can see, hear, and touch it, and you're talking to other people, and you're hearing the gains that they've experienced real time, that they're giving us the sales track to go back to our companies and say, we need this technology now. Because if we don't do this, we're going to be left behind. We're going to be the ancient Rome of the day, and we don't want to go the way of the Kmart's and Barnes and Nobles and Sears, giants in our industries for decades.
Absolutely. So. Sad stories, but we got to learn from them and apply them and
absolutely,
not make the same mistakes. So what other trade shows are you going to be attending this year, Kyle?
Well, so again, just trying to invest in myself and learn and be a better professional. ASCM is, of course, having their international conference in Las Vegas. That's September 16th through the 18th. So I'm looking forward to joining that group of professionals again and just sharpening my skills.
Yeah, it's going to be a great one. We've been to, actually, we went to the conference in Vegas a few years back, and we went to Chicago last year. Been to one here in Orlando, which is really neat. They've done a great job at APIC/ASCM, really building a valuable program. And you know, we didn't talk about this in the warm up, and I don't want to surprise you with the question, but as a longtime volunteer, seeing the big news and announcement of the ASCM, I think we all digested that change initially. But I think, in my personal opinion, in the day, it's going to really enhance your involvement with the APIC/ASCM community because there's going to be more offerings. Is that what's your take on that?
Yes. Amen. It was met with a little bit of trepidation, but at the end of the day, the fact is we need to evolve because the supply chain revolution is here. It's here right now. So it's exciting that we have new courses to appeal to younger groups, and just to blow out the offering and the course offering and our areas of expertise. Just like all things, we got to keep evolving to get better. And this is how I just view it, is just an evolution to help us get better as an organization, to connect with the younger group, but also to bring in relevant topics that'll make us older, middle-aged, I can call myself middle-aged now, middle-aged managers to be better and to be better facilitators of supply chain and be better executors of supply chain in our groups.
Absolutely. And APIX isn't going anywhere. The certifications that have been the hallmark of the organization and that body knowledge is going to continue to help organizations and individuals advance their career. But to your point, Kyle, ASCM is going to bring more offerings to the table. It's going to ramp up our horsepower to address digitization, which is such a huge initiative across the end-to-end supply chain community right now. And it's challenging. So think Boeing clearly has had some challenges here lately and related to the tragedy. But however, if I remember this factoid right, their plants around the world accept more than 3 million parts per day from over 5,000 suppliers. So imagine trying to digitize that. I mean, that's really their world. So they'll figure it out. They will figure it out, and it will prevent things that happen, within the last few weeks here. And but digitization and having ASCM position itself to be a bigger resource to address innovation, supply chain. I think it's an exciting time to be a member, and certainly exciting time to be a part of the supply chain, right?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you mentioned Boeing. It's funny because we have a board member. One of our directors on the board of directors works at Boeing. One of our instructors works at Boeing. And they talk about this all the time, that these are skills that are directly transferable to the giant companies of the world. You think of these big companies and they're using the Apex body of knowledge.
That's right.
Already. So, but yeah, I mean, I couldn't even imagine to facilitate and plan for all of those components, but they're planning like 5 years down the road.
Absolutely.
Yeah, made to order.
Made to order. So how can our listeners get in touch with you, and also how can they learn more about Danner Boots, Kyle?
Well, from Danner Boots, you can go to www.danner.com. So that's
love it. Simple, direct.
Yeah. Like I said, it's an old company, been around forever. I think we had the first. Danner.com has been around for a long time. If they want to get in touch with me and learn a little bit more about what we're doing in the Portland Apex chapter, or just connect with me professionally, feel free to reach out. I'm on LinkedIn, and my email is kgar, like Hagar, 44 at AOL.com. I told you, I'm not giving up the AOL.com. I'm keeping it. I ride till I die.
That's great. I love it. Well, to our listeners, we've been talking with Kyle Garcia, Demand Planning Manager with Danner Boots. Stay tuned. We're going to be interviewing a variety of supply chain leaders like Kyle as Supply Chain Now Radio continues its coverage of the Velocity Conference 2019 here in beautiful, sunny Orlando. Our next segment airs shortly. Hope to see you soon. Thanks for joining us. All right. Good morning. Scott Luton here with you live on Supply Chain Now Radio. Welcome back to the show. Today, we're broadcasting live from beautiful Orlando, Florida, where we're covering Velocity 2019, one of the home run trade shows that you just can't miss. We're going to be chatting with a variety of supply chain leaders today, and this is the second segment of our first episode here at Velocity. So let's welcome our featured guest, Ann Gracken, CEO of Chainlink Research. Good morning, Ann.
Good morning, Scott.
Glad to have you. I've enjoyed our warm-up conversations and excited to be with you here as our second guest here at Velocity. As our audience can probably tell, there's a lot of buzz in the room. I think we're in day 2 of Velocity, and I've heard a lot of good feedback already.
It's a great learning experience for everyone. I think there's a lot of great networking, and the folks at Legility are very approachable. You can learn a lot from them as well. So
absolutely. A-plus folks over at Legility. We're big fans. Apex Atlanta is one of our sponsors here at Supply Chain Now Radio, and Legility has been a long-time thought leader within the Apex community and a big supporter of our Atlanta chapter. So we've always appreciated that leadership they have displayed. So let's talk about you. So where did you come into Orlando from?
I came in from my home in Newton, Massachusetts.
Newton, and in the warm-up conversations, you were telling me a little factoid about Newton, Massachusetts.
Yeah, 2 great things. Firstly, Newton is always rated as one of the top 5 communities in the country to live in. But more interestingly, Newton is the home of the Fig Newton.
Okay. And we were having a good time with this pre-show because growing up in Aiken, South Carolina, my nan, Mary Lou Luton, always had fig Newtons in the kitchen. And the running gag, of course, all the Lutons love Fig Newtons. And it was, for years that was a gag. And it's been a long time since I had a Fig Newton. So now I'm going to the store and pick up the pride of Newton, Massachusetts.
Right.
Very neat. And I bet it's a good bit colder up in Newton, Massachusetts right now.
Quite a bit. But we have a hint of spring coming.
Oh, hint of spring. Love it. Hey, if all you can get right now is a hint, we'll take it, right? It's better than the, polar vortex? Is that
exactly.
Arctic vortex, whatever it was? All right. So before we talk about Chainlink Research, I want, if you would, tell us more about your background and your personal journey.
Right. I have a very fun and rewarding personal journey. I grew up in a manufacturing family. My grandparents, who were all immigrants, all worked in manufacturing in the city of New York, where originally apparel was manufactured. And through that, I had family members who actually wound up owning their own textile factories and apparel factories. And so a lot of my family was employed in manufacturing. So I breathed manufacturing. So when I grew up and moved to Massachusetts, I really wanted to work in a manufacturing setting. And that was like in the 70s was the beginning of the high-tech takeoff. You think about it, the Suns, the Data Generals, the Digitals, the Wangs. A lot of those companies no longer exist. However, they were hiring a lot, and they would take young people in and develop them. And that old expression, everything I learned in life, I learned in kindergarten.
Yes.
I learned a lot through those 2 life experiences, which have really carried me forward. And just one last vignette there. I was very honored to do a lot of really good projects in supply chain. And I got drafted out of that into the research industry because there weren't a lot of people in the big research companies in those days who actually understood how the systems work. And so I was recruited out, and it started a whole new career path for me. Which
has been successful. One last note about the manufacturing. There's report after report. Depends on, you can read all of them. All of them seemingly arrive at the same conclusion where there's a stigma associated with manufacturing and jobs and opportunities and careers. How do we not only break through that stereotype with kids, but also with their parents who are probably, as the father of 3 kids, we're trying to look out the best for our kids and steer them in certain directions where they want to go, but, trying to give them advice. How do we break through these stereotypes that still exist?
Well, firstly, it breaks my heart that that is the attitude, because actually manufacturing base and other supply chain logistics are not only increasing in their importance, and certainly in North America, but they all have job openings.
Sure,
And
absolutely.
good job openings. So I think it twofold, as you mentioned, Scott, the role of the parent. So if you want to have your children have a rewarding career, not just in terms of job movement and interesting things to do, but in terms of how much they're going to get paid over their career. If you look at how much people in supply chain get paid, they get paid quite a bit more than people, say, in retail. Women want to work in retail. Well, guess what? They don't get paid a lot of money for the privilege, right?
Well, it's interesting you mention and bring up the gender gap. Really, let's call it what it is. There is now over 500 supply chain management programs across the country, 4-year degrees, tech schools, you name it. And if you look at the breakdown in those programs, it's very close to being 50-50, male and female. However, as folks enter into the job force, you start to see a small little disparity, frontline managers, and then you move mid-career and you start to see, double-digit disparity. And then, of course, when you move into the C-suite, it's drastic. And I'm a big fan is you got to kind of see it. A lot of folks need to see the vision and see what they can do so they can be inspired and know they can do it. It seems like we've got some work to do to break through that kind of stuff, right?
Oh, Scott, absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's been a disappointment for me when I started out working. I find all the Me Too movement interesting. Fortunately, I don't have any work-related problems to report. But having said that, there was an attitude of, well, you're going to get married, or you don't care about your career. Things like that. There were also a lot of, undercurrent by older bosses towards the
It's pretty complex. There's a lot of different.
Yeah, and so it was a tough environment. Having said that, I got a lot of support from my family. My in-laws, especially, came from the old country. They were so driven with their daughters and with me to back us up. But I think that actually helped me in the work environment to collaborate more with my fellow workers and help them understand things that I was going through. So I think we can't come into any situation, whether it's the dynamics of opportunity, whatever the causes are, or other work challenges, without trying to build bridges with people and develop empathy for their problems, and they can develop empathy for mine. It really changes the climate. But if we all come in with an attitude, so I think there's personal behaviors, but I also think we have a lot of work to do in terms of helping to support the needs of women in terms of, like, and I've heard this from a lot of women executives, is they take time off from work because of family issues. And when they come back, they're A, behind the 8 ball, but B, I think the work climate says they're not taking their careers seriously. And they are.
Absolutely.
And as you know, there are a lot of single mothers, and they need to take their careers seriously.
Interesting feedback as we sit here with a female CEO of a leading research firm. So appreciate you weighing in on that, because it's not always an easy subject to talk about. But, as it's been famously said, and I'll steal this from a Southwire executive that spoke at a Georgia manufacturing summit, she mentioned that we can't effectively attack the skills gap until we really attack effectively the gender gap. So anyway. So moving right along, thanks for weighing in on that. So in the warm-up conversation we were having, we were talking about all the recognition you've received, but I think one of the things that I heard you're most proud of is the informal recognition. We were talking about how when you launched your firm, Chainlink Research, that many of your customers and colleagues wanted to pull you in, wanted to work with you. That there, I don't think there's any better, feather you can put in your hat, right?
I absolutely feel that, because you work with people and organizations, and sometimes they want you to come back, and sometimes they don't. And if they want to learn from you and continue to associate with you, I think, to me, that's the highest honor. I have a couple of trophies. They don't matter very much to me. They're dust collectors.
Yes.
But again, I've learned so much from the human race, if you will, and from the people that I work with. And I know they feel the same about me, and that touches me deeply.
And that's palatable. It is about relationships, even in this digital age we all live in. So tell us, moving from kind of your personal journey to Chainlink Research, tell us about your firm and what y'all provide.
Right. So we've been in business since 2003. And when we started out was before the financial meltdown. So my goal was to just focus on customers. And we built up the company. We had about 800 end user customers. And we took money from solution providers, but mostly we focused on end users. In those days, the research industry was not. They got money from vendors mostly. But long and the short of it, we had the financial meltdown, and that kind of changed our focus a little. But having said that, right from the inception, we wanted to stay focused at supply chain. Now, we have a broad definition of that. Starts with the customer.
Right.
So if you're in healthcare, it's the patient. If you're in retail, it's the consumer. I think you get the picture. And early on, it was just before just after 9/11. I got a phone call from a captain in the Department of Defense who was an assistant to the Undersecretary of Logistics. Long story short, we need your supply chain help. And I said, we don't know anything about defense. He said, that's fine, we'll teach you. We don't know anything about competitive supply chains. So we were able to broaden our business very quickly, and for over 7 years, I always say we survived several administrations, and really learned a tremendous amount there. And so our business, really, we're in a lot of industries. But over the years, as you know, with the technology revolution we're going through, it really applies to just about every industry you could consider.
Absolutely. And digitization is that's the tip of the tongue for so many folks in supply chain. We had a member of the Clorox company join us a couple weeks ago, and he was describing their digital supply chain initiatives. And, for as many things that are very easy and that come with an easy button to do in the era of Amazon, all this stuff, digitizing these even small companies, that is a massive project. And it's not something that starts on a Monday, ends on a Friday. So it's interesting to kind of keep our finger on the pulse as companies figure out what the best practices is as they digitize their operations. So since 2003, right? So not only you said survived, but it seems like y'all been thriving through all the, yeah.
Yeah, we have, and the work is quite interesting. And I think one of the benefit we have of being what I guess you would call a boutique firm versus the larger research firms is we don't organize by practice. So a lot of us share work with one another and back each other up if we're leading a project, but also that allows us to be careful about the kinds of projects we pick. We're not necessarily driven by the revenue goal of each practice. It's a
like a fit
collaborative
test
thing of the whole company and the folks that are in there, and rather than, okay, this practice has to make so much. Having worked in research, I get the economics behind the scene, and we've been able to sidestep that, which is great.
Oh, what a great position to be in.
Yeah.
So speaking of, we touched on a second ago, digitization, and now I want to pick your brain on, what are the 2 or 3 current supply chain trends that y'all are really tracking the most right now?
Yeah, so the first one, I like to think more about it as an outcome, which is I would call orchestration and collaboration. So if you think about the world of business relationships, we're in this hyper fast pace of dynamic partnering. And what I mean by that is, yes, there are established partnerships and we'll continue to grow them and mature them. But in this web world where everybody's online, I can decide tomorrow that company X will make a good supplier for me this one time. So I need to establish that connectivity and that instant process, if you will, but it may dissolve after that one transaction. So my people, my processes, my ability to evaluate risk, the quality of a relationship, and of course the technology connectivity all has to be there to support that orchestration and collaboration.
Bigger picture partnerships, not just transactional, driven by this one-off opportunity, but system, bigger picture, right?
Yeah, and if you think about it, with so many supply chain networks, which we'll talk about in a minute on the next trend, those online discovery systems, if you will, allow me to find those partners and maybe find better partners than I used to have because I didn't have the ability to see the world.
So, speaking of, what's your next trend?
My next.
That's a big one. The first
It's
one,
big.
especially in this era where supply chains upstream and downstream are progressively collaborating in ways that it's inspiring. Because it's no longer the old traditional relationships, and there are some some companies take a different approach of supplier and customer, but there is so much kindred spirits upstream and downstream in so many supply chains right now. And that, for me, that is one of the dynamics about the world supply chain that makes it such a great industry to be in right now.
Yeah, and it's a human thing if you think about it. We're all dependent on one another as humans. I mean, it's a natural outcome, I think, of the opening up of societies and us becoming much more familiar with each other. But I also think, back to, as you mentioned, that old-fashioned relationship, I think the idea that downstream or upstream players are not intelligent about marketplaces and value. And today, whether it's a 3PL or a trucking company, they can come to the customer and say, I have some extra value I can add to you. I've been serving you, and I notice you have this kind of problem. I can help you with that.
So what else has been on your radar?
Okay,
Ann?
so I like to use the term trillion node network.
Okay.
So
Tell us more.
Yeah, and the reason I use that, a lot of people talk about digitalization, but a lot of them think that the beginning and the end of that is B2B communications. And of course it is. But I look at the connected world that we're in and we will continue to grow in is people, places, devices, things, the environment, the location. What are the impacts and forces? And every person and everything will have or already has a connected device. And through those connected devices, we can draw intelligence. So that trillion node network, of course, digital supply chain is within that. And, but when I think about B2B, I don't just think about it as communications of messages. I think about it as interoperating. So back to that collaboration issue. If you have a better way of doing a process and you've codified that, and you and I are in a trading network, I might want to adopt your methodology. So, of course, I need technology to allow me to interoperate. So I'm not going to get there with EDI. And I'm probably not even going to get there with a traditional API. So that means I need a higher level supply chain network, if you will, platform to allow me to handle any kind of communication, whether it's social, transactional, process, or ability to optimize what we're doing.
Or a combination of all that.
Right.
back to your trillion node network, which sounds like something. It's a T-shirt. We're going to make a T-shirt out of that somewhere.
I love it.
So there have, and I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but there are retailers that are putting sensors into the shirts and boots and different things that they sell, so they gather some of this usage data as it goes into product design and durability and all this other stuff. That it's the world we live in, but that is such still like Isaac Asimov type stuff, and
Absolutely.
But we're going to see more and more of that. To your point about the trillion node network, there's so many sources of data that we're tapping into these days, and of course, naturally, retailers and folks that sell the products want to get closer to the consumer and make sure they've got their finger on the pulse, right?
Exactly. And about a decade ago, I wrote an article called "The Future is Fascinating and Scary."
Amen.
And yeah, exactly. I think about that once in a while, and I personally, I'm like, I think about it as connected as I want to be. But I always wondered why my retail customers, and now, of course, they're doing a lot more of that and saying, we need to extend our intelligence to the consumer, and really so.
Yes. Your billion node network is not big enough. We got to go trillion node network.
Exactly.
So anything else before we move on to talking different things?
Yeah.
What are the trends you're looking at here?
I think the changing workforce, and it's interesting. I mean, we all think we know it. You have kids.
Right.
I have
that means I'm daily reminded I don't know everything. That's
Exactly.
Maybe hourly.
Yeah, and at night, the same thing. I can see the difference in how they spend their time and their heads bowed, not in prayer, but looking at their personal devices. But having said that, the changing workforce, I think, and it isn't just about the millennial change, which is really a big factor, but we're going through a huge organizational change. I mean, back to the hyper outsourcing, downsizing. Those kinds of things, and the impact of technology.
Absolutely.
I think, and one of the discussions we've been having a lot at this conference, in fact, is the generational attitude towards the adoption of technology. There are some of us who, hey, if it's useful, I'm all in on that. But there are others, and I think one of the speakers this morning said, that's not the way I do it. And a lot of those people are retiring.
Right.
But having said that, even for the most biggest digital natives, I think understanding how and when to apply technology, and I think that has a huge impact on the dynamics of the workforce.
I'm with you. And there's so many things I'd love to weigh in. We need to take the next 3 hours and talk about a lot of what you just shared there. But one of the interesting anecdotes we had this past week or last week, our oldest, Brantley, is 9 years old. And as a family, we're watching an old 80s sitcom. And in this one scene, these two roommates are using a wall-mounted traditional landline and thumbing through the yellow pages, right? Such an interesting scene. And as we told Brantley what that was, that they were punching and had to their head, she turned and said, well, how do they take that phone into the car with them? They make calls while they're driving. And it was one of those moments that led to a whole nother series of questions and epiphanies for her, right? And I wish we had captured it all on video, because it was such a learning opportunity for us as parents and as older folks that remember those times. And I see a lot of parallels. You talk about this workforce, the generational transfers we're experiencing, and how there's all these different preferences now, and I can't remember if where I stole this from, but some speaker, because the M word at millennials is so cliche to bash these folks, and you can't do that, right?
Not at all.
You can't do that. Someone that was speaking at one of these conferences said that we all have some millennial in us. We all share, and probably all the generalities that are put out there, we all have a little bit of that. So,
I love that.
Yeah.
It's like they recently came up with the DNA research that we have Neanderthals.
Seriously, yeah. That's
so
crazy.
we have both. But, my attitude, and I did this very formal research on generational change. And when I presented it, it was at a conference like this, but on mostly demand planners. So it was very consumer-driven discussions. And I said, these are your customers.
Amen.
And not only that, they're taking over the company. I'm not taking over. I'm in my swan song period. They are the one, whatever decisions are made, they're the ones who are going to have to live with it. And just think about how you felt when you were their age, and maybe you had to serve in a war you didn't want, or you did want it, or you had to work in a work environment and you said, why did they do it this way? They feel the same way. And so get them involved, but let them know, guess what? The decisions you make, you're going to have to live with. It's akin to parenting,
Yes.
but it's also collegial. You know, just a short vignette. One company I worked in was a dot-com startup. And what the CEO did, the younger kids treasured us older people's supply chain advice. So what we did is we shared workspaces, Webby kid,
Right.
and old supply chain person, right? And I learned so much from them. It was a great learning experience for me to be with people who were with it and now as far as technology.
You know, along these lines, as I mentioned, Apex Land is one of our sponsors, and I happen to serve on the board as a volunteer, and we've got a executive advisory board that we've had in place for several years. That's really provided a huge value to our nonprofit chapter. And one of the members comes from a leading beverage company headquartered in Atlanta.
Yeah.
And she shared a fascinating best practice with the board a couple of years ago, how they would bring new college graduates, new hires into the company, and do a reverse mentorship where they don't pair a senior executive to mentor the new hire. They actually do the opposite, where they get the new addition to mentor and share, mindset with the folks that have been there. I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah, I love that. And not as interesting, but what I love is a lot of the companies who do go into the colleges to recruit either interns or perms, they give them real challenges for those assignments. They don't say, okay, you just follow around and you do spreadsheets while the rest of us do the great thinking. Throw them in and give them a challenge. And I've noticed that with my young folks in the jobs that they have. Both kids, master's degrees and, honor students and whatnot. But in the work environment, I was actually pleasantly surprised at the work challenges that they've been presented with. And they appreciate it.
Yes.
And they're working hard. They're not.
And they're capable.
And they are.
Yeah.
Very
interesting. Well, let's shift gears a minute as the din and the buzz has died down just a smidge here at Velocity Conference. What's your favorite aspect of conferences like this, or specifically this one?
Yeah, that old expression, learning never ends. So I like one of my bosses once said to me when I was younger, which now I know what he meant, is he said, you're like a sponge. And at first I took great offense to that. But today I like coming. Agility is a great conference. As I mentioned earlier, not only the customers are busy sharing, the management team, they have a great culture and they're very open. And so instead of now you have to chase someone down, and then when you finally chase them down at large multi-billion-dollar software company, there's a stilted conversation.
Sure.
There's not a give and take learning. Here, there is. And so, numero uno on learning. I think that's the number one thing that I appreciate. And I also appreciate the low key. Having been to hundreds of conferences, usually there's so much hype. And I find that distracting. And so, to me, getting a chance to learn, and if you think about the folks that are here, they need the infusion of knowledge and great ideas. That's what they should be getting, and they do get out of it. And I've heard that from various attendees, how they're writing things down that they have to go home and think about and do. And I think that to me, that's what it's all about.
That's definitely a secret sauce. And we've heard similar feedback from, this is our second interview today, but we've been here since last night, and we've heard a lot of that same feedback you just shared. So, Ann, how can our listeners get in touch with you and learn more about Chain Link Research?
Yeah, so our website, just www.either chainlinkresearch.com or clresearch.com. And, there's information about the company. A lot of the research is for free.
Wow.
So it's been sponsored by someone else, but we also do a couple of those projects ourselves every year because we think they're important. So there's information on there about different industries and about the team, and there's contact information there as
Perfect.
well.
Perfect. Well, we've been talking with Ann Gracken, CEO of Chain Link Research, the pride and joy of Newton, Massachusetts. It's been such a pleasure. We need to bring you back for another hour. I don't know if you're ever going to be in Atlanta anytime soon, but we definitely would like to have you come back and share more perspective with us.
Thanks, Scott.
You bet. Chainlinkresearch.com. So to our listeners, stay tuned as we'll be interviewing a wide variety of supply chain leaders like Ann as Supply Chain Now Radio continues its coverage of the Velocity Conference 2019 here in Orlando. Our next segment airs shortly, so hope to see you soon. Thanks for joining us. All right, Scott Luton here with you live on Supply Chain Now Radio. Welcome back to the show. Today we're broadcasting live from beautiful Orlando, Florida, where we're at Velocity 2019, one of the leading supply chain trade shows in the industry, where we've been chatting with a variety of supply chain leaders today. And this is the third and final segment of our first episode here at Velocity 2019. So let's welcome our featured guest, Mike Griswold, Vice President Research for Retail at Gartner. Good afternoon, Mike.
Hey, Scott. Thank you. Great to be here.
Glad you are here. So where did you travel into Orlando from?
I live just outside of Boise, Idaho. So
Okay.
I made the trek from Boise to here. It's been great.
So what's the weather like up there?
Well, it was nice. Upper 50s, low 60s. Great golfing weather for me. So it was good. Very nice.
So you play a good bit of golf. What's your handicap looking like these days?
Right now I'm a 12.
Oh, man.
With a goal to get to 9
Okay.
by the end of the year. So we'll see.
Spoken like
We'll
a
see.
true supply chain practitioner.
Yes.
Current state, future state.
Exactly.
I love it. Okay.
Exactly.
So before we talk about Gartner and some of your latest research, tell us more about your background and your overall journey.
Sure. I've been with Gartner 12 years. Came into Gartner through the AMR acquisition a number of years ago. Before that, have spent about 25 years in retail, 15 years in the supermarket space, working for Shaw's Supermarkets and Albertsons, which took me to Idaho. And I worked 10 years in discount retail prior to that. Lots of different positions from in the stores and operations through the corporate office, mostly focusing, Scott, on process and technology, which I think really set me up for the analyst job, right? Trying to understand, different people, process, technology challenges, and how do we help people work through that?
Absolutely. Dealing with lots of change. The
For
era
sure.
of change is coming faster and faster, right?
It is. If you think about just retail, we've seen probably more changes in the last 5 to 10 years than we saw in retail the 50 years before that. Whether it's the introduction of Amazon and just the way consumers want things now, it has really affected the retail industry and in particular us in the supply chain.
Exciting time, and even with its challenges, warts and all, it's an exciting time to be in supply chain. So that was some of the key takeaway we've had from some of the speakers that sat in that chair before you did this morning. Is there's never been a better time to be in supply chain, and really, I think in terms of how the rest of industry views us, I think we've got a seat at the table unlike ever before as well.
We have a supply chain top 25 methodology where we evaluate companies, and one of the things we've heard loud and clear this year from those companies is a change in the role of the supply chain, moving away from something that people have to have, a cost of doing business, to in many instances their competitive weapon. It is the way they will differentiate themselves in the market. And I can't think of a better time to be in the supply chain with that change going on, where we want our supply chain to differentiate us. We want our supply chain to be that weapon. And it's unlike any other time that we've really had in the supply chain.
Yep. So switching gears a bit, and we'll touch on that top
Sure.
25 list in a minute that the industry always looks forward to. Most folks recognize Gartner as the world's leading IT research and advisory firm. But in your words, tell us more about what Gartner provides to its clients and industry.
Sure. What we try to do is provide compelling research, must-have research, compelling interactions that help our clients deliver their mission-critical priorities. Our job is to give them objective advice to help them make better decisions more quickly and more cost-effectively.
And with information, and this is what the fourth or fifth industrial revolution, or information comes with information comes power, and in this era we're talking about change and the rapidly advancing, increasing pace of change. You got to have that information at your fingertips, right?
You do. Whether it's things we heard about today, like the Internet of Things and the data that brings us, or whether it's just big data in general. Successful businesses today are going to find ways to not only capture it, but use it to drive the business forward. And I think one of the things that I've loved hearing about over the last day and a half here is that the customer centricity. How do we work from the customer back? It doesn't really matter what industry you're in, what type of company you are, however you define the customer, working your way back through the supply chain in terms of how you deliver that experience that they want, that's critical. And in our mind, that's what separates the leaders from everybody else, is how do you do that in a repeatable, scalable way?
So, perfect segue. So, you published a recent report entitled Retail Supply Chain Outlook 2019, Elevating the Consumer's Shopping Experience. If you could, for our listeners, share a few approaches that you're seeing companies take to improve our shopping experience as consumers.
Sure. One of the things for sure is we recognize that shoppers want their product when and where they want it. So the idea of just being able to deliver to a store is no longer enough. We need to be able to support customers that buy online, collect in store, buy online, pick up at remote locations. We heard today about the mobile Domino app, where order a pizza delivered to you anywhere in a park or wherever it might be. So this flexibility around how shoppers want their stuff is huge. And we need to be able to deliver that through a couple things. One, we need to do a better job of demand planning. We heard a lot about that already at this conference, but being able to understand what people want, where they want it, and when they want it is huge. Secondly, we need to think about the evolution of the role of the store. The stores used to be a place where people just walked in and bought stuff. Now, for many organizations, they are a rapidly growing node in the supply chain. Some of our data suggests that anywhere between 50 and 75% of companies that we surveyed are seeing anywhere from a 15 to 20% increase in the number of orders that they're processing on a daily basis in their stores. So the ability to demand plan better and the ability to think of your store as a node of your supply chain, those are two things in particular that we spend a lot of time talking to our retailers about.
Wow. So continuing down this path of supply chain trends, and of course the consumer experience is like one of the North Stars, right? But what are some of the other, 2 or 3 other current supply chain trends that you're tracking the most right now?
One of them is around metrics. If we think about it, I do probably 3 metrics calls a week, which is a lot for an inquiry topic. And no one ever says, Mike, I don't have enough metrics, give me more. What they tell me is, I've got way too many. They're very functional. I can't see across the supply chain. So one of the trends is people are trying to find a more balanced end-to-end approach to how they measure the success of their supply chain. Second thing that we're finding and watching pretty closely, and it's an area of research for me, is taking advantage of some things that other industries have had in place forever, like sales and operations planning, sales and operations execution. When I talk to retailers, It's about how do we align planning and execution in the short term initially, that 0 to 3 month planning horizon. How do we start to align those? And it really is much more for retailers a process discussion. How do we get the merchants, the stores, the supply chain, all to talk together at the same time around the same planning horizon? So those are two. The metrics and planning and execution alignment are two of the hotter topics that I think feed back into your point, Scott, about how do we consistently deliver that customer experience.
Yeah. So, we're based in the Atlanta area, and Apex Atlanta is a big sponsor of Supply Chain Now Radio, and we've been volunteers in that space for 12, 13 years. And it seems like, just in my experience, throughout that last 12, 13 years, S&OP is the hottest and the most, companies are really looking for proven expertise, proven best practices in S&OP, more than I've ever seen it before. Is that kind of what you're picking up on as well?
It is. One of our more popular quantitative studies we did around S&OP was in 2012, and we just completed a new one in 2018. And it really shed light on a couple things. One, companies that are more likely to achieve or exceed business outcomes. How are they define them? Sales, revenue, margin, have a formal S&OP process compared to those that have an informal process. We see organizations starting to put S&OP roles in their org charts like we've never seen before. You could go to probably any leading company in consumer products, healthcare, life sciences, industrial, and you will see director-level S&OP roles. We're starting to see that interest in retail. Not to the level of other industries, but frankly, Scott, they've had a 30-year head start on us.
That's right.
But it is definitely becoming more and more prevalent in retail, which is fantastic. I think for us, it's an opportunity to take advantage of those best practice and learnings that everyone else has figured out. And I think it's an opportunity for us to maybe accelerate our learnings because we've got the backs of others that we can learn from.
Absolutely. So switching gears a bit, the Velocity Conference here.
Sure.
We're about halfway through it, right? Halfway through day 2. It's a 3-day event. What are some of your earliest takeaways from the event thus far?
I've got several, kind of in no particular order. Great event in terms of number of people. I think great event in terms of the balance between kind of the legility stories around their technology and the customers. When we as analysts come to these events, we want to hear how are people putting these applications to practice, and there's some really great stories here. But I think what resonated the most with me was Alan's keynote yesterday, where we talked about this 10x supply chain, how our supply chains need to get 10 times faster. And they used a very powerful graphic of a 1950 Indy pit stop that took 67 seconds.
Yes.
And then the one from this year that took 1.7 seconds. I think to me that resonated, and hopefully with the audience, around the impact and the magnitude of change we have to have in our supply chain. It's not going from 67 seconds to 30 seconds. It's 67 seconds to 1.7. and I think that is really the mindset we need to have, especially in retail moving forward.
Very interesting. I missed that keynote, but I'm gonna reconnect with Corinne Bursa, because visually, and I've seen a similar YouTube video before where it shows the pit stop operations from years gone past, and that was at the time. That 60 seconds or 57 seconds, that was best in class. Moving now, and I love your point, it's not improving from 57 to 37 incrementally. It's night and day.
It is.
And that is the expectation. That's the new bar.
It is. The video was powerful in so many ways. One, it showed it reemphasized that 10X idea, right? 67 to 1.7. But as you're watching the video, and it's just taking forever, right? And the environment that we're used to today, it's like, get the tires on, get the windshield clean. It's taking forever. And then the other thing that Alan called out, I didn't notice it when I first heard it, but it was very powerful. You could hear the other cars going around the track as you're spending that 67 seconds in the pit stop, and you're wondering, and Alan pointed out very well, that's your competition.
Yeah.
Right? They're continuing to go around the track. At some point, they may have to pull in for their 67 seconds. But it really comes down to, how do you take the things you do today and just make them, exponentially better, right? And it was very powerful.
Getting the muda out of the process and taking, if the driver doesn't care about what color the muffler is,
Right.
leave it alone, right?
Exactly.
But, in order to, taking this analogy back to supply chain, in order for organizations to understand that their pit stop is currently at 67 seconds and it's not best in class, they have to have access to information and research and analytics that Gartner does a great job in producing, right?
We do. We have a couple of ways that we help people. One is we do have a benchmarking practice or service, benchmarking research, where we can help companies understand, with some of their key metrics, where do they sit relative to their industry, to their peers. That's helpful for folks. But probably the best thing we do is we have a self-assessment methodology. And if anyone has spent any time with us, they know we love self-assessments. We've got a ton of them, but they provide a great starting point. We have a 5-stage maturity model, and for almost any element of the supply chain, the self-assessment will tell you that in this particular process, you're a 1.2 or you're a 2.2 in our 5-stage model, which is good to know. But what's most helpful is it then maps out a roadmap for us. How are we going to take you from 2 to 3? And in what areas? Is it a people issue? Is it a process issue? Is it a technology issue? Is it a combination? So those are some of the ways that we help people. But for us, and for me in particular, working with retailers, it's about that starting point. It's about being able to get the entire organization to recognize, we're at 67 seconds or whatever the number might be.
Right.
And this is what 1.7 seconds looks like. And are you? And for us, it's are you ready to do it? Right. It's a lot of heavy lifting. It's a lot of change. We talked a little bit today in one of the sessions about change. Change is huge, and we know retailers not the most change comfortable segment of industry. I would don't think I'll get many disagreements with that, Scott. So it's hard for us, but I think one of the advantages we've had, and many people might not think this way, but the advantage we've had is Amazon, who's basically said, this is the way the world is going to look. You can either compete against us or you can lose. And I think a lot of retailers have said,
resistance is futile.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And a lot of retailers have said, okay, that's what good looks like. That's what our supply chain needs to start to look like.
So continuing down, you've got a Gartner has an upcoming supply chain executive conference in Phoenix in May. I think that runs from May 13th to the May 16th. One of our biggest friends of the show, Daniel Stanton, who's CEO and co-founder of Secure Marketing and author of the book Supply Chain Management for Dummies, part of that Dummies series, which is really neat. We're big fans of. He went to the 2018 conference and came back with key takeaways that it really resonated with our audience. And it seems like y'all have got some neat things in store for the 2019 version. Can you share a sneak peek with our audience?
Sure. It's the event has grown tremendously. The theme this year is called A New Era, Converging the Physical and Digital Supply Chains. And the reason and how we came up with that is we think about some of the things we've been talking about for the last 2 to 3 years. It's been heavily digital. What we also recognize, though, is people have invested in physical assets for the last 30 to 50 years, whether it's plants, trucks, whatever it might be. And now is the time that those two things need to come together, right? We need to understand, how do we bring the physical world into a more digital world, and how do we take the digital capabilities that we have to try to automate some of the things we have on the physical side. So we're really excited about that. We have already 1,800 people registered with a target of 2,300. So it's going fast. But I think there's kind of three things, Scott, that we're really going to kind of showcase. The first is this idea of how do we move from internal integration to this idea of ecosystems. The second thing is going to be, how do we move from automation to autonomous, where machines are making more and more decisions for us. And then lastly, how do we move from optimization to calibration? And how do we get the supply chain to be able to embrace those three qualities? So that's going to be the big focus for us at the May event.
Well, we'd love to have you come back on after that event and give us some of your key takeaways.
That would
it
be
seems
great.
like a very powerful conference. So what other trade shows are on your radar this year?
So normally, I don't go to a lot, Scott. I mean, JDA Focus it used to be Focus. I'm not sure what they call it this year, but that's a good one. The NRF show in January is a good one. Those are about the three that I go to. There are some, though, that are very more operationally focused that are good ones to go to. I don't attend those just based on my coverage area. So those would be the ones where I tend to spend some of my time.
Okay. And so how can our listeners get in touch with you or learn more about Gartner?
Sure. Gartner.com, probably the easiest way. Feel free to email me direct, mike.griswold@gartner.com. Those are probably the easiest ways to learn more about us.
Fantastic. Well, to our listeners, stay tuned as we'll be continuing to interview a variety of supply chain leaders like Mike as Supply Chain Now Radio continues its coverage of the Velocity Conference 2019 here in Orlando. We've been sitting down with Mike Griswold, Vice President Research for Retail at Gartner. Mike, thanks so much for your time today. This wraps up our first episode here at a very vibrant, if you can't hear it, lots of buzz in the room, lots of momentum. So we're going to conclude today's session on just a few final items, a few final announcements here. Mike, bear with us here. For those folks in Atlanta or folks looking for world-class supply chain certification training, we've got upcoming APICS classes at Georgia Tech's Supply Chain and Logistics Institute, and those come up. CSCP and CLTD boot camps kick off again on June 24th. Mike mentioned some of the more operationally geared summits. We're proud media partners of the e-commerce operations summit coming up April 9th through the 11th in Columbus, Ohio. You can learn more at www.operationssummit.com. I think you still have to say the www part. Maybe not.
So.
Maybe that's a safe assumption to make these days. In May, the Association for Manufacturing Excellence will be holding its Atlanta 2019 Lean Summit in Atlanta. Great speakers, plant tours, networking, all focused on the world of manufacturing. We're, again, excited to serve as a media partner. You can learn more at ame.org. And in June, I for Transport, EFT, is bringing its 3PL and Supply Chain Summit to Atlanta June 10th through the 12th. Big lineup of speakers from UPS, Atlanta Lakes, Uber Freight, Cisco, DHL Supply Chain, many more. You can check out EFT.com, or you can shoot us a note. If you can't find the information you're looking for, you can shoot us a note to scott@supplychainnowradio.com, and we'll get you more information. So as we wrap up our first episode here, big thanks to our guest today here at Velocity 2019. We've got several other episodes coming up. Our leadoff, Kyle Garcia with Danner Boots, Ann Gracken with Chainlink Research, and finally our cleanup hitter, Mike Griswold with Gartner. Had a pleasure speaking with you today, Mike.
Thank you, Scott, very much. I appreciate it.
Well, I hope to see you throughout the next day and a half here at one of the neatest supply chain trade shows we've been at this year. To our listeners, be sure to check us out at supplychainnowradio.com, replays of our interviews, other resources. You can find us on iTunes, SoundCloud, Google Podcasts now, soon to be on Stitcher. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. On behalf of the entire Supply Chain Now Radio team, this is Scott Luton wishing you a wonderful week, and we will see you next time on Supply Chain Now Radio.